Top of the morning, Dan and Amy, actor, comedian of sorts, Michael Rappaport. You'd probably see him, recognize him if you see him. He's sort of been a bit actor for a long time.
Okay.
One of the Hollywood types who is very virulently anti-Trump during the Trump administration. Well, he's getting mugged by the reality of New York these days with mayors like de Blasio previously and newly minted DAs like Alvin Bragg. He posted this video to his Instagram page of a dude walking out of a Rite Aid in Manhattan with 2 full bags of stuff that he didn't pay for.
Why not?
And walking right past a guy wearing a security jacket. Just walking right down the aisle towards Rappaport and the security guy, and just right out the door, and nary a word was said other than this commentary.
Yo, I'm looking at this dude, this motherfucker. Yo, this dude is, I can't believe I'm seeing this. This motherfucker. Yo, this fucking guy just filled his 2 bags up with everything in Rite Aid right here on 80th and 1st Avenue. He's walking down the street like is Gucci. Look at me in my face like what's good. I was watching him the whole time. My man just went Christmas shopping in January. He had the condoms, the shampoo.
Yeah, welcome to the party there, Mike. Lance Morrow, a cultural critic, author, we've had on the show many times, writing the Wall Street Journal this week about Minnesota, recalling an August 1973 cover story for Time magazine that praised Minnesota as the state that works. The cover photo showing Governor Wendell Anderson dressed in a plaid flannel shirt, grinning and holding up a northern pike he just caught in one of those 10,000 lakes there in Minnesota. The story from Newsweek 1973, from Time 1973. It's a state where a residual American secret still seems to operate. Some of the nation's more agreeable qualities are evident there. Courtesy and fairness, honesty, a capacity for innovation, hard work, intellectual adventure, and responsibility. Minnesotans are remarkably civil. Their crime rate is the 3rd lowest in the nation. 50 years later, writes Morrow, he received an email from an old friend who lives in Minneapolis. The email began, "Another report from the hinterland. The people of Minneapolis now share online updates of carjackings and other crimes. It would be difficult to exaggerate the extent of violent crime throughout the city. Everyone knows someone who's a victim. This will be a huge issue in this year's elections." And Morrow writes, there's a multitude of variables, but the lack of public safety is at the top of the list. He writes about prosecutors in Democrat-ruled cities across the country that began to refuse to prosecute minority criminals, almost no matter their crime. See no evil, prosecute no evil. An age of magical thinking persuades itself to embrace many inversions of the truth, one of them being the idea that the criminal is the victim. The left, now dominant, will pay the price. Fantasies of retaliation will play vividly in voters' minds when they go to vote in November, just how vividly the Democrat Party and President Biden will discover. He writes, "The difference between my 1973 story and the news reports of 2022 amounts to the difference between Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn. Tom gives you the boyish, innocent, sunshot rendering of Hannibal, Missouri in the middle of the 19th century. Huck's story is a version of America that includes poverty, murder, alcoholism, child abuse, race prejudice, blood feud, and imbecility. Minneapolis today looks a little more like Huck Finn, the Huck Finn version, although without Huck's humor or his rascal charm." For more on the topic, we're pleased to be joined again by Chris Arnade, who is a writer and photojournalist covering addiction and poverty in America. We've had him on before when this book came out, and I highly recommend it again. The book, Dignity, Seeking Respect in Back Row America, and his formulation you may be familiar with from our show or other places that have profiled his work, sort of front row versus back row America, which he'll explain again, I'm sure. Chris, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
So you wrote this piece towards the end of last year at your I think it's your Substack or another Substack.
Yeah, my Substack.
Your Substack. And, about sort of where Biden and the Democrat Party stood. And you sort of come to the same conclusion Lance Morrow does, but you had other reasons at the time. And among the reasons you cited was not crime. And I wonder if that was just an oversight, or if you don't think the sort of the Rappaport journalism there at the Rite Aid, or the data now in terms of the spike in violent crime in big cities, not just big cities, but particularly big cities around the country over the last 2 years, if that doesn't play into what happens in November as well.
Oh, I think it does, but I'm kind of looking more at national elections, and I think crime is very localized, and what I'm trying to get at is when I look at global waves, crime is very localized, and one of the most frustrating things about the recent discussion around it is often the people who are most unconcerned about crime, or certainly want to change policy on crime, such as the defund police types, are people who don't live in neighborhoods where crime is currently spiking. Mm-hmm. And so that's another issue. But I would say on the national election side, to me, the biggest issue right now is COVID. I mean, it touches everybody. Crime's bad. But it's localized and it doesn't touch everybody. You can go throughout. You can live your year and not have to run into someone at the right unless you're first and 80th who's doing that.
By the way, that Rite Aid's closing next week because of things like this, because they can't afford it. They can't keep up.
But
the other thing is, a lot of where the crime is happening is high Democratic strongholds that are unlikely to necessarily where Biden won by 30 to 40 margin. It's just really not going to he might, if he wins by 20 instead of 40, it's not going to really change things.
No,
but I will say that to me the biggest issue is entirely crime adds to the whole. My whole point was Biden was elected to return things to normal, and things aren't normal. And crime certainly adds to that sense of abnormality. But for me, the real issue is COVID. I mean, COVID has just completely made it touches everything. COVID policy has touched everybody, and particularly it's touched people in the back row or the people who aren't elites in a negative way.
I want to get to COVID, but just one more point on crime, and then I'll let you opine on COVID, because of course I agree with the premise of what you're saying. But the whole back row, front row America thing, which I like that formulation, it seems to me that, as you say, crime doesn't touch everybody, but it disproportionately touches back row America. And it may not turn New York or Chicago into bastions of conservatism, but it may, and this is the point, one of the points you made in your piece about enthusiasm, it may keep a lot of coalition partners or people that are part of the coalitions that Democrats need in order to be successful in congressional races and statewide races for Senate and governor and others. It may keep them home.
Where it's going to really, and you're already seeing it, where it's really going to change is the GOP conservatives finally have a chance with Latino voters, and the crime is one of the big issues there because it's happening in their neighborhoods. They generally are socially more conservative than what I think a lot of people give them. A lot of the narrative about them is they believe in family, faith, and flag. The flag might, their F-150 might have a Mexican and American flag on the back rather than just an American flag or an Irish flag. But they're very similar, and they don't want crime in their neighborhood. And so I think there it's going to have an impact. It could have impacts in a lot of the places around Bakersfield, around East LA, and places like that, and where there's high Latino presence. And the districts themselves are not like Biden plus 60 or whatever they are. And some of these, gerrymandered away. But so I think it can have an impact.
Well, where does inflation fit in with all of this? Because that touches everyone, regardless of...
I guess if I had to rank them, my number one is COVID, 2 is inflation, and 3 is crime. And they're all big issues, and they're all hurting Biden and the Democrats. So I really can't see how, it's really setting up for a really atrocious election for the Democrats in 2022. And even, unless stuff dramatically changes in 24. Biden has proven to be And then fourth, I'd put his incompetence down there. His incompetence is partly why the other three are there. It's not good for the Democrats, and there's really, and in some ways, there's not much they can do about it at this point. These are all things that are kind of viral phenomenons, and once they're out of the bag, you can't really put them back. Literally, the COVID is literally a viral phenomenon. I'm not sure why Biden said he could solve it. It was a dumb promise.
Right, until he said that it's not going to be solved by the federal government, which would then sort of violates his promise. But so inflation, there's not a lot that they are interested to do, much less really can do, even if they pivoted. There probably are some things they could do with respect to COVID, and particularly COVID and schools, that would perhaps provide, less animus directed their way than currently. So that there's some things they could do with respect to COVID policy, COVID response.
Well, here's the problem. So I agree with you. They're in a hard place because they listen way too much to their zero COVID policy. The wine moms, the very front row people who basically, when COVID hit, bought a third home and went there and lived there and got delivery from Uber and delivery from whatever, Amazon and other places, and took Ubers only if they insisted that their driver be basically in a bubble suit. They're people who basically have completely removed themselves from society, and they can. And they're dictating a lot of the Democratic policy towards COVID. So if he tries to shift towards what is the more normie view of COVID, which is, hey man, can we just get back to living? We've gotten our shots, we've done what we've done and told, and we just want our kids to be able to be kids again. If they do that, if he moves that, which is the position I think is politically the most positive position, he gets yelled at on Twitter by people who are like 3% or 4% or 5% of the population who happen to be very loud and have a lot of power within the Democratic Party. So it's I agree that he can do things. I don't think it's possible politically for him to do it. If he had some if he was really if he was a true leader, he would. But he seems to be kind of confused.
I think from our previous conversations and your writings, I think, you're sort of a center-left guy. And I wonder where you find yourself after Trump and Biden. Are you one of these people now who says I'm politically homeless, or where are you amidst the last 5 years now?
Yeah, I have no political home. I will probably, I write a lot about people who don't vote, and I know it's politically incorrect to say you don't vote. I may not vote because, in honor of the people who are so mad about the whole system, they just what's the point, man? I think that I really would like to see the Republicans lose their Chamber of Commerce wing and actually really lean into some of the things that Trump either accidentally or intentionally leaned into, which is, putting America first economically, and really thinking about looking out at his supporters and seeing that it wasn't just, a bunch of yahoos. It was a pretty multiracial group, and there's a lot that the working class Hispanics had in common with the working class whites, and focus on finding a coalition there.
Wait, are you?
But it's not so clear.
Were you encouraged when Kevin McCarthy said that he was essentially going to de-link House Republicans from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce? Because I don't know if he will, but I was happy that somebody actually said it in a position of leadership, and I agree with that too.
Yeah, one of the more noxious influences on the Republican Party is in your city, is the University of Chicago Economics Department. They've basically been able to win a lot of the arguments. The donor class or the front row Republicans are very different from their base, and that kind of battle was why Trump won. That battle has taken place in some ways, and the Chamber of Commerce got a Jeb, and his exclamation point kind of got kicked out of the party. It's not clear that they've given up, though. That that the party's completely been gotten rid of their kind of globalist, can't find a war they don't want to fight, can't find a job they can't ship away to another country, wing of the party. And so if that kind of economic wing of the party were to leave, I think there would be a lot more. I'd be a lot more encouraged about the Republicans.
Do you think if President Trump ran against Biden in 2024, he would win?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be, I think I actually, I'll piss off the Trump supporters and say that I think he would probably have the least chance of beating Biden. I think at this point, almost any Republican, other than like Jeb, would beat Biden. And so they, I think there's a certain fatigue that would come from the Biden Trump election, but it would just kind of make people kind of feel like they did when they thought about the idea of Clinton versus Jeb, which is, come on, not this again. But I do think that at this moment Trump would easily beat Biden, and we got 3 years between now and then. But I do think Trump is probably one of the weakest candidates to beat Biden, given all the baggage of the past years.
Since you spend so much time traveling around the country and talking to quote unquote back row American types, I mean, I agree with your assessment that a lot of regular people don't take voting as sacrosanct, something that they're compelled to do, the way that the front row Americans do. But I wonder if there's another dynamic at play that you're seeing at all with back row Americans losing faith in institutions, whether they believe in government, whether they previously believed in government or were skeptical of government, because there's both camps. And if you see, like in the not too distant future, some sort of manifestation of a real revolt from back row Americans, or is it going to be just more fatalism that overtakes people who think that the system isn't going to work for me and I have no ability to change it, so I just throw up my hands?
I pivot between the two. Some days I think, the fatalism will win, and some days I think the revolt will win. I mean, the thing is like, when I say I'm not going to vote, what I'm getting at is like, there's this kind of this like, there's this massive distrust in institutions that I'm kind of like channeling, and I'm trying to get people to understand, and to the point where people don't care if they vote or not. Like, who cares? Like, it doesn't change my life, so why? And the massive loss of faith in institutions. I mean, COVID was like, an anvil that broke the camel's back. I mean, that just crushed what remaining faith there was in institutions, as did the 2020 election. Like, it wasn't hard to see that every institution was trying to push Biden to be president. Every institution that existed. It wasn't hard to see that every institution was really confused and wrong on COVID. And so, people have a great capacity to. I think most normal people, as most of the a lot of listeners know from their family members, don't really pay a lot of attention to what's going on in the world, and they shouldn't have to. That's not what living's about. Not worrying about what bill is going through Congress. But they also have common sense. So when they see something that's absurd, it gets them enough angry to and the absurdity of a lot of the COVID policy of the last 2 years and the injustice of it, the fact that people who were sitting in their country homes ordering Amazon, working on their laptop, were telling them that they have to go to their job but they can't go to barbecues. The whole absurdity around the protests, saying that now you can go out and protest. Right.
Just a flick of a switch.
All those things really just broke the public trust to a degree that I think, it could either go into a complete fatalism or it can go into complete revolt. But it's going to go in one of those two directions because people just have no, the expert class, the front row who scolds you and tells you what you should do. I mean, they got no credibility anymore, and a lack of credibility with your institutions it can cause a lot of things, bad things, and sometimes good things going forward.
He is Chris Arnade, writer and photographer, photojournalist, covering addiction and poverty in America. Again, his book, Dignity, Seeking Respect in Back Row America. Chris, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy using the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Grandview buys homes. Hi, I'm Tom Detlich, and I have great news for people who want to sell their home